a forbidden view, the revelation that shattered the Alpha. The wind howled across the jagged cliffs of the shadowed realm, carrying the scent of rain and the faint tang of magic. In the fading light of dusk, the kingdom looked like a painting of sorrow. Mountains draped in mist, forests whispering secrets, and castles that seemed carved from shadows themselves. Leora walked with careful steps along the narrow path leading to the Alpha's fortress. Each footfall echoed in the empty valley below, as if the earth itself held its breath. She had been chosen. Sent by her village, not out of hatred, but because fate had marked her. Her heart was heavy, yet she carried herself with a quiet strength. She had heard the stories of the Alpha Kale, the man they called untouchable, merciless, and cruel. Some whispered that he had been cursed long ago, bound to solitude and shadow. Others spoke of eyes that could pierce the soul and hands that could crush bones as easily as dreams. Leora did not fear him, not entirely. She feared what she might find in herself when she met him. The gates loomed above her like dark sentinels. They were wrought from black iron, twisted with patterns that seemed almost alive. As she approached, the massive door swung open silently, as if the fortress itself had been waiting for her. Inside, the corridor smelled of stone, smoke, and something older. Something that hummed with the memory of power. Torches flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to watch her as she moved. A voice stopped her in her tracks. Deep, calm, and commanding, it rolled over her like a wave. "Step forward." She did. Kale appeared at the top of a grand staircase, tall and imposing. His cloak was black as midnight, the edges catching the torchlight. His hair fell around his shoulders, dark as the shadows behind him, but it was his eyes that held her attention. Eyes like storm clouds, restless and deep, holding both rage and grief. For a moment the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. "You are Leora," he said, his voice a mix of curiosity and caution. "Yes," she replied, her own voice steadier than she felt. "I have come as you required." He studied her silently. There was no warmth, no smile, only the weight of judgment. Yet she felt a strange pull, a flicker in the depths of his gaze that no one else had ever held. He was powerful. He was feared, and somehow he was broken. "Very well," he said finally. "You will stay. You will learn the rules of this place. And above all, you will survive." The corridors twisted and turned, leading Leora through the fortress. Every step echoed with history. She passed hallways lined with tapestries that told stories of ancient wars, battles won and lost, and a line of rulers who carried the kingdom through shadows and light. Each tapestry seemed to move with her, as if the figures in the threads were watching her, judging her worth. She was brought to a chamber at the heart of the fortress, a room both vast and confining. The walls were lined with tall windows, though heavy drapes kept most of the twilight out. A single bed, a desk, and a chair were the only furniture. It was simple, almost barren, yet the air hummed with a strange energy that made her skin prickle. "You will rest here," Gale said. "Tomorrow your training begins." Training. She had expected it, but the word still struck her with cold clarity. Kale did not see her as a guest or even a human being. She was a tool, a weapon, a key perhaps to some prophecy she did not yet understand. As Kale left, the door closing with a sound like finality, Leora moved to the window. The fortress overlooked the valley, where the forest stretched like a dark ocean beneath the fading sun. She could see the river glinting like silver in the twilight, winding between cliffs and trees, disappearing into shadows. The view was beautiful, and yet forbidden. Something in her chest tightened, as though the world she knew had vanished and left only this realm of stone and secrets. She did not know then that the view she had glimpsed from the window would haunt Kale as much as it haunted her, for in that forbidden vision The prophecy had whispered its first words, unseen yet felt. The Alpha will fall. Not by force, but by the eyes of a marked soul. The next morning, the fortress stirred with life and whispers. Leora awoke to a world of cold corridors and flickering torchlight, the castle seeming even larger in the harsh morning glow. A servant, pale and quiet, brought her food, bread, cheese, and a cup of dark wine that smelled faintly of iron. She ate slowly, listening to the distant sounds of movement, guards practicing, creatures stirring in the forests, and Kale's own footsteps echoing like thunder through the halls. Her training began in the grand arena, a circular courtyard at the center of the fortress. Kale stood at the edge, arms crossed, his presence radiating control. Around the arena, the walls were high, adorned with carvings of wolves, moons, and stars. The shadows seemed to stretch toward her as she stepped forward, a reminder that the world she had entered was alive in its own way, and that it was always watching. "You will learn not only to move but to see," Kale said, his voice cutting through the air. "To feel. To understand the power within you and the danger around you. A misstep can cost more than life. It can cost everything." He demonstrated first, moving with a grace that was almost otherworldly. His steps were silent, precise. His hands moved in patterns that seemed to bend the air itself. And now Leora watched, heart pounding, aware of every breath, every motion, and the impossible weight of his presence. She tried to mimic him, but her movements were clumsy. Every time she faltered, Kale's gaze sharpened, cutting through her as if measuring her soul. Hours passed in a blur of motion, silence, and shadow. Leora felt exhaustion clawing at her limbs, but she pushed forward. She could not fail. Not yet. Not when something deep inside told her that Kale was more than a tyrant. He was broken, and perhaps, like her, searching for a way to belong in a world that had cast them both into darkness. By evening, bruised and tired, she returned to her chamber. She sat by the window again, watching the sky turn from violet to indigo. The forest below whispered secrets in the wind. Her thoughts returned to Kale, storm-eyed and commanding, and to the prophecy she had glimpsed in the hidden chamber earlier that day. It seemed impossible, yet she felt it in her bones. She had been brought here not merely to survive, but to change something in him, something he had long thought impossible to change. The night deepened, carrying with it a quiet tension that pressed against the walls. Leora felt a strange connection to the shadows that moved across the room, almost as if they were watching her, protecting her and warning her at the same time. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a low, almost imperceptible growl. Leora's eyes widened. She turned, half expecting a beast to appear from the shadows. Instead, Cataline was standing there, in the doorway, his eyes reflecting the torchlight. He did not speak at first, simply studied her, and in that moment, she felt the weight of centuries press upon her. "You should not be wandering alone," he said finally, his voice soft, almost gentle. Yet it carried a warning she could not ignore. I was thinking," she said, trying to steady her trembling hands. "About the prophecy." "About everything." Kale's eyes darkened.
Be careful with such thoughts. Some truths are meant to be kept hidden.
Others are meant to destroy you. Leora swallowed, her heart hammering. "And what about you?" she asked. "Are you afraid of it?" For a moment, Kale did not answer. Then he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Afraid?" he said, the word a whisper against the walls. "Perhaps. But fear is nothing compared to regret, and I have already lived too long with that." Her chest tightened. There was a human behind the legend, a man bound by duty, grief, and shadow. And somehow, she felt that her arrival had begun to unearth something in him that had long been buried. The night passed with the storm outside, lightning flickering across the mountains and rain drumming against the windows. Leora lay awake, listening to the fortress breathe around her, feeling the invisible threads of connection stretching between her and the alpha. Somewhere deep within the shadows, a secret watched them both, and she understood, with a chill and a thrill, that the revelation she had glimpsed, the forbidden view, would not remain hidden for long. When dawn broke, pale and uncertain, Leora rose from her bed with a sense of purpose. The path ahead was dangerous. The man she faced was powerful and haunted, but she was marked, and in being marked, she carried a spark that might ignite the darkness itself. The Alpha would see her. The world would see her. And the prophecy had already begun. As she stepped toward the grand doors that led to the arena, her heart beat with anticipation and fear. Somewhere deep in the fortress, Kale watched her, the storm of his own emotions mirrored in her courage, and the forbidden view waited, patient and inevitable, ready to shatter the Alpha. The morning mist hung low over the shadowed realm, wrapping the fortress in a shroud of silver light. Leora's footsteps echoed in the hallways as she made her way to the arena. She had slept little, her mind tangled with visions of prophecy and the storm-eyed Alpha who watched her from the shadows. Every glance Kale had given her left a mark, a memory that seemed to pulse beneath her skin. Kale waited at the center of the arena, his presence commanding even without words. The wind caught his cloak, making him appear larger, more untouchable than ever. He did not greet her, did not offer encouragement. Instead, he simply watched, eyes like lightning over dark clouds. And Leora knew that every misstep would be noted, every hesitation remembered. "You will begin with control," he said at last, his voice slicing through the cold morning air. "Your body must obey your mind. Your mind must obey your instincts." "Ah, bah!" "Fail, and you will learn the consequences." Leora nodded, swallowing her fear. She had already felt the weight of this place pressing against her. The fortress did not forgive weakness. The first exercise was simple in concept, but impossible in execution. Kale moved like shadow and wind, his motions precise and fluid. Leora tried to follow, but her arms ached, her legs burned, and her balance faltered. Every stumble brought a flash of Kale's eyes, sharp and judging, and she pushed harder. Her body trembled, but she forced herself to rise again and again. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the cold stone of the arena began to burn through her gloves and boots. Sweat streaked her face, mixing with dust and the faint metallic scent of the fortress. Kale's gaze never wavered, and she realized something terrifying. He was not just observing her. He was seeing her in a way no one else ever had. "You are clumsy," Kale said finally, his voice calm but edged with steel. "And yet, you persist." "That is rare." Leora's chest heaved. She had expected punishment, perhaps even anger, but not recognition. She dared to look at him, hoping to find a hint of warmth. There was none. Only the storm, the weight of him, and a shadow of curiosity that made her heart quicken. As she rested, a flicker of movement caught her eye. From the corner of the arena, a figure emerged. A wolf, massive and silver-eyed, moving with unnatural grace. Leora froze, fear sharp as a blade. Kale stepped in front of her, his hand lifting slightly as if to command the creature. "It will not harm you," he said. "Not unless you give it reason." The wolf approached, sniffing the air between them. Its eyes locked on Leora's, and she felt something stir deep inside her, a pulse of recognition, as if the creature knew her, or perhaps recognized the mark that destiny had placed upon her. "You have a bond," Kale said quietly, almost to himself. "That is unexpected." Leora did not understand his words, but she felt their weight. There was magic here, subtle and deep, and she had stepped into it without fully knowing how. The afternoon brought new lessons, more complex than the first. Kale tested not only her body, but her mind and instincts. He pushed her to anticipate his movements, to read the patterns in the wind, the shadows, even the way the light fell across the stone. Leora stumbled many times, but each time she rose, learning, adjusting, sharpening herself like a blade against stone. Cale observed silently, rarely offering instruction, yet every glance felt like a lesson. Every small nod or flicker of his lips a guide. Leora began to see cracks in him too. Moments where his control faltered, where his eyes lingered too long, or his hands tightened over a weapon with an almost human hesitation. That night, Leora found herself in the hidden chamber she had discovered the day before. The walls were covered with runes and prophecies, glowing faintly in the torchlight. She traced the lines with her fingers, reading the words that seemed both ancient and alive. The Alpha will fall, not by force, but by the eyes of a marked soul. Her heart pounded. She did not know if she should feel fear or purpose, but one thing was clear. Cale's fate was entwined with hers. She could not yet understand why, but a strange certainty pulsed in her chest. Her arrival had begun to shift something deep in the fortress, and deep within Cale himself. Days passed, each one blending into the next, a rhythm of training, observation, and fleeting moments of unspoken connection. Leora learned to move with precision, to anticipate danger, and to trust her instincts. Cale began to test her in ways that were subtle but telling, leaving her alone in the shadowed halls, observing how she handled herself, seeing if she noticed the hidden dangers he left as challenges. It was during one such test that the first real bond formed. Leora had been practicing in the northern wing of the fortress, when a shadow moved too quickly. She reacted without thinking, blocking an unseen blow and rolling to safety. The attacker stepped forward. It was Cale, testing her again, but there was something in his stance that made her heart catch. "You are faster than I expected," he said, his voice low, and sharper, but not yet ready. "You rely too much on reaction, not anticipation." I will do better," Leora said, her chest heaving, but her eyes meeting his with newfound determination. Cale studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded.
"Good. That is
rare." And then he left, silently, as a shadow, leaving her alone with the echo of his words. For the first time she felt a flicker of something she could not name. Hope, perhaps, or recognition. That night, Leora could not sleep, and she walked the corridors, the torchlight flickering against the cold stone walls. She paused at a window overlooking the valley, the forest stretching endlessly below, silvered by the moon. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets she could almost understand. A sudden sound made her turn. Cale was there, leaning against the archway, watching her.
"You are restless," he said. I
think too much," she admitted, her voice soft. "About you, about the prophecy, about this place." Cale stepped closer, the shadows clinging to him like a living cloak. "And what do you think?" he asked, voice low. "Do you fear it, or are you drawn to it?" She wanted to speak the truth, but words failed her. There was a pull between them, invisible but undeniable, a tension that made the air thick and heavy. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe both." Cale's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, she saw the man behind the legend, a man bound by duty, cursed by fate, and yet yearning for something he believed he could never have. "You are brave," he said quietly. "Perhaps more than you know, and perhaps you are more dangerous than even you realize." The days that followed were a delicate dance of tension and discovery. Leora learned more of Cale's world, its rules, its dangers, and the subtle magic that lingered in every shadow. She discovered a garden hidden within the fortress, a place of strange beauty and silence where Cale sometimes walked alone. She ventured there one afternoon, finding him seated beside a fountain that shimmered with faint light. the water reflecting the storm in his eyes. "You came," he said, not turning to look at her. "I wanted to," she said, stepping closer. "It is beautiful here."
"Beauty is dangerous," he murmured. "It can blind you.
"It can make you weak." "But isn't it worth the risk?" Leora asked, her voice trembling with courage, even a little. For the first time, Cale looked at her directly. His eyes were unreadable, storm and shadow entwined, and she felt a shiver run through her. "Perhaps," he said, voice soft and almost human. "But some risks are forbidden." Leora's heart ached at the words, sensing the unspoken truth. She had seen it in the hidden chamber, glimpsed it in the prophecy. Their connection, their bond, was not just dangerous. It was forbidden. And yet, it was already taking root. That evening, a messenger arrived from the northern forests. A rival clan had moved against the shadowed realm, testing its defenses. Cale summoned Leora, and for the first time, he allowed a flicker of uncertainty to show in his expression. "You will remain here," he said, his voice steady but cold. "And yet, I will trust you." Leora felt a surge of emotion she could not name. Pride, fear, and the beginning of something far deeper. She nodded, understanding that she had become more than a mere tribute, and she was a part of this place, of Cale's world, and perhaps of his fate. That night, as the wind howled again across the cliffs, Leora sat by the window, the forbidden view stretching before her. The forest below seemed alive, whispering of prophecy, danger, and the fragile thread that bound her to the Alpha. Somewhere, in the shadows of the fortress, Cale watched her, and in that watching, they were both changed. For the first time, the Alpha felt the stirrings of something long buried, a crack in the armor of his solitude, and Leora felt the weight of destiny pressing against her chest, a mark that would not be ignored. The forbidden view had revealed its first secret, and both of them knew, deep down, that the revelation would not stay hidden for long. The storm came without warning, rolling over the shadowed realm in waves of thunder and rain. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the fortress in harsh, fleeting flashes. Leora stood at the edge of the northern cliff, her cloak whipping around her as the wind tore through her hair. She could see the forest below, dark and restless, and beyond it, the mountains that seemed to pierce the clouds. Cale appeared beside her, silent as the shadows, his cloak heavy with rain. His eyes held the storm of the sky, restless and wild, yet, in that moment, there was something different, something unmasked. The Alpha, the untouchable, the fearsome ruler, was showing her a fragment of himself no one else had ever seen. "The prophecy," Leora whispered, her voice almost lost in the roar of the wind. "It speaks of a view, a vision. Is this it?" Cale did not answer immediately. He looked down at the valley, then back at her. "A view is more than what the eyes can see," he said finally. "It is what the soul perceives and the soul fears. What you are about to see may shatter you as much as it will me." Her pulse quickened. She had felt the pull of destiny from the moment she had arrived, had sensed the invisible threads connecting her to him. Now, those threads were taut, vibrating with anticipation and with fear. He led her inside a ruined tower at the cliff's edge, its walls crumbling, yet still standing proud against the wind. The top chamber was empty except for a single circular platform, etched with glowing runes that pulsed faintly in the darkness. Cale motioned for her to step forward. "Look," he said. As she did, the runes flared, and the air shimmered like heat on stone. The vision unfolded before her, an image of Cale, not as he was now, but as he might become. She saw him alone, surrounded by shadows, his eyes haunted by grief and fear. Yet beside him, there was another figure, herself, standing not in fear, but in quiet strength, reaching toward him with light in her hands. Leora gasped, her heart clenching. The vision was beautiful and terrifying. She could see the pull of destiny, the danger that awaited, and the fragile thread of hope that bound them. Cale stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. "Do you understand now?" he asked. His voice was softer than she had ever heard it, carrying vulnerability and weight. "The prophecy, it is not just words. It is a warning, and yet, it is not only doom. It is a chance.
I think I understand," Leora said, her voice trembling. "It is not meant to control us. It is meant to guide us."
Cale's gaze softened further, though the storm in his eyes did not vanish. "And yet, the world will try to control us, to break us. You must be ready to see what others cannot, to do what others will not." Days passed in a blur of training, strategy, and preparation. Leora learned not only to anticipate danger, but to sense it in the unspoken words, in the subtle shifts of the air, and in the quiet rhythm of Cale's presence. Each moment she spent with him deepened the connection between them, a bond both forbidden and undeniable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, Cale brought her to the fortress library. It was vast, filled with shelves carved from black stone, stacked with ancient tomes and scrolls. Dust floated in the fading light, and the air smelled of ink, parchment, and age. "You will learn the history of this realm," Cale said, his voice quiet. "You must know its dangers, its secrets, and the magic that binds it. Only then can you help me protect it." Leora traced her fingers along the spines of the books, feeling the pulse of power that lingered in the pages. She paused at one, a thin, leather-bound volume etched with silver runes. As she opened it, the words seemed to shimmer, speaking directly to her mind. The text told of alphas and their mates, of bonds forged through trust, courage, and sacrifice. It spoke of power that could be given or taken, of darkness that could overwhelm even the strongest, and of light that could heal even the deepest wounds. Cale watched her silently. "Do you understand why you are here?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly, "because fate has chosen us together." His eyes darkened with emotion. "Together, perhaps, but the world will not allow it without challenge. And he hesitated, a rare vulnerability in his voice. "I am not certain I can protect you from what is coming." The weight of his words pressed on her. But instead of fear, she felt determination. "Then I will learn. I will be ready, not just for me, for you, for us." A week later, a messenger arrived, breathless and soaked from the storm. He carried news that the rival factions were moving against the shadowed realm faster than expected. Cale's jaw tightened, his hand clenching into a fist. "You will come with me," he said abruptly to Leora. "The battlefield is not safe, and yet I need you there, to see, to understand, and to act." Leora nodded. Fear prickled along her spine, but beneath it was a steady flame of courage. She had trained, learned, and grown. She was no longer just a tribute. She was part of the fortress, part of Cale's world, and perhaps part of the prophecy that bound them together. The night they rode out, the wind screamed around them, and the forest below seemed alive, writhing in shadows. Cale led the way, his horse moving with a grace that mirrored the predator he was, alert to every sound, every movement. Leora followed closely, sensing danger in ways she had never imagined. The bond between them pulsed, a quiet rhythm beneath the chaos of the storm. The battle did not come in the form they expected. No swords clashed, no war cries split the air. Instead, the enemy moved like shadows, testing, probing, seeking weaknesses. Cale and Leora moved through the forest, silent and precise, reading the signs in the swaying branches, the broken undergrowth, the faint whispers of wind.
"You sense them," Cale said, his voice a low rumble.
Do not hesitate. Fear will betray you.
Trust yourself. Leora felt the pulse of magic, the faint tug of destiny, and for the first time she understood fully. She was not only witnessing Kale's world, she was shaping it. Her instincts, her courage, and her presence could tip the scales. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving too quickly, too deliberately. Leora acted without thinking, stepping forward and with a swift motion, blocked the attack. Kale was beside her in an instant, their movements synchronized, their bond a dance of strength and trust. Afterward, they paused, breathless. Rain soaked them and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Kale's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that carried more meaning than words ever could. "You are more than I imagined," he said, voice low and unreadable. "Perhaps the prophecy is not a curse, but a chance, and perhaps you are the light I have long thought lost." Leora's heart raced. The Alpha, fierce and untouchable, had revealed a fragment of his truth, and she, in turn, had shown him her courage, her strength, and a spark of hope that had not existed before. That night, back in the fortress, Leora could not sleep. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed and quiet, and the moon hung low, casting silver light across the cliffs. She climbed to the top of the tower, seeking the forbidden view once more. Kale joined her silently, standing behind her as they gazed across the valley. "This view?" she whispered. "It is beautiful, terrifying, and I think I understand now." Kale's eyes were stormy, yet there was a softness she had never seen. The forbidden view shows not only danger, but truth, and the truth is that nothing is certain except choice. "You have chosen courage. You have chosen to stand beside me." Her chest tightened with emotion. She wanted to speak, to reach out, to bridge the distance between them. But the weight of prophecy hung heavy. She knew that the world outside the fortress would not wait for their bond to form, that enemies, fate, and magic would test them at every turn. "You will see more," Kale said finally, his voice almost a whisper. "And each vision will challenge you, break you, and rebuild you. You must be ready for the revelations that come next." Leora nodded, determination blazing in her chest. "I am ready," she said, "for whatever comes." Kale looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time, the Alpha did not seem untouchable. He seemed human, vulnerable, and yet more powerful than anyone could imagine. The storm had passed, but the tension between them did not fade. It grew quiet and insistent, like the pulse of the forbidden view itself. Both of them knew that what lay ahead would test everything: loyalty, courage, love, and destiny. And in the quiet moments before dawn, when the fortress seemed to hold its breath, Leora realized the truth. The prophecy had begun to unfold. The forbidden view had been revealed, and neither she nor Kale would ever be the same again. The revelation was coming, and when it did, it would shatter the Alpha. The first light of dawn spilled across the shadowed realm, burning through the mist that clung to the mountains. The fortress stood tall against the waking sun, a monument of stone and shadow, scarred yet unyielding. Leora stood atop the highest tower, the wind tugging at her cloak and hair, her eyes scanning the valley below. Somewhere in that world, the prophecy waited to unfold completely. And she knew that the moment of truth had come. Kale approached quietly, his presence filling the space behind her like a shadow given form. His eyes, stern, dark, and restless, met hers. For the first time, there was no command, no judgment, only a quiet intensity, a mixture of fear, hope, and something she had come to recognize as vulnerability. "It begins today," he said softly. "Everything we have prepared for, every choice we have made, leads to this moment." Leora nodded, her heart steady despite the fear gnawing at her chest. Then we face it together, she said. Kale's hand brushed hers briefly, a small gesture heavy with meaning. The bond between them, tested through trials, danger, and forbidden visions, had grown into something neither could deny. It was not just loyalty or duty. It was trust, respect, and something deeper, a connection that fate itself had woven. The enemy emerged as the sun climbed higher, but not as they had feared. Shadows moved across the valley, a host of figures cloaked in dark armor, advancing silently, testing the borders of the shadowed realm. Kale rode to the edge of the fortress walls, the wind whipping around him, the Alpha in full command of the battlefield. "You will stay close," he told Leora, his voice sharp but calm. "And yet, do not fear to act. Trust what you have learned." Leora mounted her horse, feeling the pulse of destiny in her veins. She had trained for this moment, studied the forest, the shadows, and the subtle magic that hummed through the land. She knew the prophecy was not just a warning, it was a guide. And she would follow it, alongside Kale, into the heart of danger. The battle began quietly, with no clash of swords or cries of war. The enemy moved like shadows, testing the fortress defenses, probing for weakness. Kale and Leora moved like one, their instincts intertwined. Each movement, each choice, was precise. Leora anticipated threats before they arrived, while Kale countered with the skill of a warrior who had faced death countless times. At one point, a shadow figure lunged at Leora, moving faster than she could have expected, but Kale was already there, stepping in tandem with her, and together they blocked, parried, and redirected the threat. Their movements were a dance of trust, a silent understanding that their bond had strengthened through training, danger, and revelation. "You are stronger than I imagined," Kale said quietly, voice low as the wind, "not just in skill but in spirit." Leora felt a rush of warmth, tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. The prophecy loomed like a cloud above them, and its final revelation was still hidden, waiting to test everything they held dear. As the shadows receded, a sudden vision overtook Kale, a flash of the forbidden view. He saw himself alone, broken, and yet reaching for something he thought impossible. Leora's hand, her courage, her light. The vision tore at him, revealing a future where loss and despair could undo all he had fought for. But within that vision was also hope, a chance for redemption, a path to save both his world and the woman who had awakened something long buried within him. Kale gritted his teeth against the fear rising in his chest. "I will not fail," he whispered to himself. "Not her. Not this world." Leora sensed the change in him, the weight of his burden and the strength of his resolve. "Kale," she said, reaching for his hand, "we can face this together." His eyes met hers, storm and shadow tempered by trust. "Together," he echoed, gripping her hand with a firmness that carried both protection and surrender. The final confrontation came at the edge of the cliffs overlooking the valley. The enemy had gathered in greater numbers than anticipated, yet Kale did not falter. His command was precise, every motion calculated. Yet beneath the armor of strategy, there was raw humanity, a vulnerability he had only shared with Leora.
"You are ready," Kale said, turning to her.
"Whatever happens, remember this. The prophecy is not your cage. It is your guide, and you are its light." Leora nodded, courage blazing. "Then we act. Not out of fear, but choice." The shadows surged forward, yet Kale and Leora stood firm, their bond a shield against despair. They moved as one, striking with precision, evading danger, and turning the tide of the battle. But the true challenge was not the enemy. It was the prophecy itself, testing their hearts, their trust, and their ability to see beyond fear. A sudden, final wave of darkness swept across the cliffs, an unnatural force that threatened to consume both Kale and Leora. Kale stepped forward, raising his hand as if to command the storm itself, but he faltered for the first time. Leora saw the fear in his eyes, the weight of centuries pressing down upon him. "You can do this," she said, stepping closer. "I am with you. Always." Kale's chest rose and fell rapidly. The storm mirrored his inner turmoil, yet in that moment, he let go of the fear that had bound him for so long. He allowed the bond between them to guide his actions, not just strength or skill. The energy of the forbidden view, the prophecy, and their shared courage surged through him. And for the first time, he acted not as a ruler bound by destiny, but as a man shaped by trust, hope, and love. With a final motion, Kale and Leora moved as one. The darkness shattered, dispersed by the strength of their bond and the clarity of their courage. The shadows receded, the valley below quiet once more, and the storm broke into a clear sky, revealing the rising sun. Exhausted, drenched, yet victorious, Kale and Leora returned to the fortress. The first light of day illuminated the walls, the gardens, and the towers, casting long shadows that had once seemed oppressive, now softened by the warmth of dawn. Leora looked at Kale, seeing not just the Alpha, but the man who had faced prophecy, danger, and his own fear, and had survived, changed, but stronger. "You have changed," she said softly. Kale looked at her, eyes storm-dark but steady, and for the first time, he smiled. Not a commanding smile, but one of quiet surrender and relief. "We have changed," he said. "Because of you, because of us." Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining. The forbidden view had revealed danger, despair, and heartbreak, but also hope, courage, and love. Together they had faced it, and together they had emerged stronger. In the days that followed, the shadowed realm slowly healed. The enemy had been driven back, their forces scattered. The forests regained their calm, the valleys glistened with rivers of silver in the sun, and the fortress, though scarred, stood as a monument to resilience. Kale walked the halls, no longer untouchable, no longer bound solely by duty. He carried himself with a new grace, tempered by humility and trust. Leora followed him, her presence a constant reminder of the bond they had forged through trials, visions, and courage. They visited the hidden chamber once more, tracing the prophecies on the walls. This time, the runes glowed warmly, not with warning, but with understanding. The prophecy had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately revealed that the greatest power was not strength or fear, but trust, choice, and the courage to embrace vulnerability.
"You see," Kale said quietly, "the prophecy is not a cage.
It is a path, and we have walked it together." Leora smiled, a soft warmth in her chest. "Then we choose the path we make, not the one we fear." The forbidden view had revealed its secrets. The Alpha had been shattered, not by force, but by revelation, challenge, and trust. And in that shattering, he had been remade. They stood together on the highest tower once more, gazing across the valley that stretched endlessly before them. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets, hope, and the faint pulse of magic that would forever bind them to this land and to each other. Hale turned to Leora, eyes softer than ever. "We are not bound by prophecy," he said. "We are bound by choice, by courage, by this bond." She took his hand, gripping it firmly. "Then let us walk forward," she said, "together." The sun rose fully, spilling light across the mountains, valleys, and forests. The storm had passed. Shadows remained, as they always would, but the light was stronger now, carried not just by the day, but by the courage and trust of two souls who had faced destiny and chosen one another. And in that light, the Alpha, once shrouded in fear and prophecy, had finally found his redemption. The forbidden view was no longer a threat. It was a promise, a revelation that had shattered him, and in shattering, made him whole.